In this video, we're going to talk about the PHPInfo function. PHPInfo function is a built-in function into PHP. It's hard-coded in there to give you a lot of information about your web server. It gives you the different versions of the software you're using, different operating systems, all the modules that are installed, and even a bunch of environmental variables. It's a very simple script. To see this script in action, I've included in the Lab 7 files. If you go into your Lab 7 folder and look at the phpinfo.php file, you can open it up and there it is. It happens to be several lines in my program, but you can condense it down into one line very easily. The opening tag here on line 1 shows that we are having a PHP script. Blank line 2. Line 3 here is the text. Very simple. PHPInfo, opening bracket, closing bracket, semicolon. That's all you need in there. And then down here, I get yelled at because I feel if you have opening tags, you should have closing tags, but in PHP, you don't necessarily have to have this closing tag. But anyways, this is the script. Now, I've uploaded the script to the web server. If you want to see this script in action, you can go into the Lab 7 folder. Once again, up here, Lab 7 folder, the index page. And right here, the first link, PHPInfo, that is that actual page we just saw inside of PHP Storm. Go ahead and click on it, opens up another tab, and it gives us the PHPInfo function. As you can see, there's a lot of information here. Look at the scroll bar on the right side. It's all types of information here. So back at the top, it says what version of PHP we're running. Different versions have different functionality. They even have, to do the same thing in a different version, you may need to use different syntax. Right up here it says we're using PHP version 5.4.45. Now, this was the one that came installed by default with our web server when we configured it. It works fine for this class. It's actually a little bit older. Current version of PHP is 5.5.33. So we're a minor version old. But PHP is a little weird. They also have other versions. They also support a second version, 5.6.19. So we're way behind on that. And then they've even got 7.0.4 out. Now, a lot of people are not necessarily jumping into 7.0.4 because there's lots of changes. Figured out better ways to run their databases more efficiently, better coding behind the scenes. They've redesigned a lot of the functions. So anything that worked on version 5 of PHP probably won't work on 7. It takes complete rewrites. So that's why they're maintaining a version 5 and a version 7. Another piece of information I'd like to look at right here, it says what version of an operating system is your web server running on. It's typically Windows Server or it's a version of Linux like Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, Red Hat, something along that line. For us, as long as it runs PHP and we have a MySQL database, that works for our class. But we're using Azure, so they're going to give us the Microsoft Server 2012 installation. One of the other pieces of information right here I like to look at is this configuration file. All the settings that you see on this page are in a file someplace. It's basically a text file with a .ini extension, meaning it's a configuration file, initialization file. And if you want to make a change, you actually go in, edit that file, restart PHP, and it'll apply those new settings. This tells you the exact location of file is. Now, scrolling down here, as you can see, there's just a whole bunch of different functions. In here, I'm in the core section. Right here is another one I typically always look at, is file uploads. Does PHP allow you to upload files? Depending upon how your web administrator set it up, the answer may be yes, maybe no. If you allow files to be uploaded, that could allow you to be somebody upload malicious code to your web server. So that's something I always like to check, especially if you're uploading files. Down here, where are we? Memory limit. How much memory is PHP going to take? 128 megs, I think, is kind of on the low end. Some bigger PHP applications need more than that. So what you do is you go into that php.ini file, that configuration file I showed you earlier, change this value to a bigger number, maybe to 256 megabytes of RAM. You can go up to 1024, which is a gigabyte of RAM, or even 2 gigs or 4 gigs, depending upon your application needs. But sometimes the applications will come back and say, ran out of RAM. You need to increase this value right here. The other variable I like to look at right here is the upload max file size. This is the maximum file size that you can upload into PHP. Now, 8 megs is good for a text document or a Word document, but when you start looking at videos, other documents that have pictures embedded in it, or just even some normal pictures nowadays, that is a very small number. So you may have to go in and increase that. Once again, you go into the configuration file and you would increase that file size. Scrolling down, we have, once again, we have just a whole slew of stuff in there. Typically, you as a developer won't spend a lot of time looking at this. Down here is the MySQL. That's our database we're using, and PHP needs to have a connector into MySQL. And here you can see what version of MySQL we're running. Technically, you're not actually looking at the database for the version, but you're looking at the connector. And the connector usually matches the version, or it's very close. So right here, you can see that we're running MySQL 5.0.10, so 5.0.10. Current version of MySQL is 5.7.11. We are, once again, several versions old on our MySQL database. For what we're doing, it works great. And one of the last things we look at as we scroll all the way down, notice how they're going alphabetical until we get to the end, and then we look at, there's some environmental variables here. This is information that may or may not be important to you. If somebody's hosting your web server and you need to put in some information, sometimes they don't necessarily tell you what directories everything is nested in. You can find out here. Here we have our app data, we have our public files. Looking through here, once again, this is where our PHP configuration file is. We can see that Azure is mentioned a couple times. Remember, that's what we use to set up our web server. And technically, we're using Tomcat 8 as our web server. We're not using Microsoft's web server. So there's all sorts of different information that you can get here. You may never need it. Sometimes you might need it. The big deal here is that little script that I showed you, that PHPInfo right here, just that little line in there, gave us all of this information. So this is the PHPInfo. If you ever need to look up anything about your web server and you're running PHP, this is an excellent place to look at it. Thank you.